Good afternoon, and thank you so much for staying until the bitter end of what's been a very long but fascinating day. As you say, Matty, I was all ears until the last line, and then you've absolutely ruined it for me. But I love your pledge, win well. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and best of luck when the games are here for you and the whole team. We do work quite closely with the English Institute of Sport, and much of your language I could pick up on are very similar. What I'd like to do today is just to give you a whirlwind tour of the Inter-Jockeys Fund and what we look to do in terms of supporting jockeys and jockeys' mental well-being in the UK. The Inter-Jockeys Fund is quite a mature charity. It's an independent specialist charity supporting jockeys, their dependents and their families. And we're approaching our 60th anniversary next year. During those 60 years, we have extended our scope quite considerably. And it was actually in 2009 that we built our first rehabilitation centre. It's called John Oaksey House, named after our founding president, Lord John Oaksey. It's based in the National Hunt community of Lambourne. It was initially built as a retirement home for what we thought would be a safe haven for former jockeys when they retired. But actually, the demand was very different to that. We know that jump jockeys in particular suffer a significant number of fractures and breakages, and they came to us looking for support in actually that rehab. Following on from Oaksey House in 2009, we went to the North Yorkshire town of Malton, where we built Jack Berry House, and then finally the triumvirate was completed just before COVID struck in 2019, when we built Peter O'Sullivan House in Newmarket, the headquarters of flat racing in the UK. I'll just give you a little whirlwind tour of what these three centres deliver now. It's not perfect, but we are really, really proud of those three facilities. And of course, it's far more about the team working within them and the culture that we establish than the actual new buildings themselves. Going back to the Inter-Jockeys Fund and just highlighting the vision, and for us, it's all about keeping it simple. And we are there to improve the lives of inter-jockeys and their families. We are, by truth, a well-being charity, so it's not just mental well-being. And so we have our holistic support, the general well-being, the pastoral support. From that comes financial need, into the medical support now provided at those three centres, and from that, the specific mental well-being. And I should highlight here that I'm not clinical, so please, any clinical directions any clinical questions will direct back to Maddie. We started working with clinical psychologists Changing Minds back in 2019, and they've been a real game changer for us. We consider them to be top of their game within the UK, and they also work with a large number of other sports as well, which is so helpful in terms of sharing best practice. We have access to a clinical psychologist at each of our centres every day of the week now. So for jockeys who are looking for support, they know that they can come to us and that they'll be able to access somebody at top of their game immediately which when you can compare that to the rest of the population, certainly in the UK, getting that kind of access to that kind of mental wellbeing support just simply doesn't exist at present. We've spent a long time working on our strategy. It's so important that everybody is aligned and working to the same aim, and it's simple. It's a healthy body, it's a healthy mind. We're not saying that that's going to prevent injuries. We've got Tom Marquand up the road in Sydney having his operation today, of course. But what Tom is that he's got a healthy mind, he will have a healthy body, and actually he'll recover from that injury far quicker than he might otherwise. We work really closely with the jockeys, and we want them to be proud of the system. We are their charity. We work extremely closely with the BHA, but we're not part of that governing body or the regulatory authority. And we actually think that's a real bonus, because it means that we are a safe haven for the jockeys. We are the jockeys' charity, and relationships are very, very important to us. We're listening to their needs, we're understanding their needs, we're providing them with information and education, we're hopefully influencing the racing community in the right arenas, and we're supporting people to recognise when help might be needed, and providing access to compassion, care and support, our key 3 values. I make no apology for the detail on this slide, but I'm not expecting you to read it all. But what I would just highlight is the amount of thought that's gone into this strategy from the whole team, and particularly to draw to your attention the 3 areas that are circled in red. And if I work from right to left, that first one being appropriate and safe responding. Sadly, we do know that jockeys are under massive pressure. They're driving miles, certainly in the UK. They're always hungry. They're always under pressure from trainers, owners, etc., etc. Difficult for relationships to survive. It's a hard game. And we do have crisis. And for us, this was a really, really important first step in knowing how to cope with those crises when they came in. For our home team, this has given such an increased level of confidence. So when we get a red flag, when the flag comes through and there's somebody in crisis, we work through this flow chart, and it helps us to manage those boundaries. You can't help but want to help people when they're in distress, but actually an over-eager amateur can cause so much harm, and it's so important to understand where your limitations are and to remember those boundaries. Going back to my red circles on that strategy document, again, a really important area, and I'd love to learn from other racing jurisdictions whether others are also following this route, is the screening process. Now, it's not following your GAD screening process, which is so commonly used, but it's actually more of a broader clinical conversation. Matty, perhaps it's something we can pick up on if we do have time. But we're encouraging young jockeys as they enter the industry to open up and to talk and to think about their own mental well-being. One of the particular benefits of Peter O'Sullivan House's new market is that we're linked to the British Racing School, so that's one of the 2 main training schools in the UK. So we're now seeing all of the young jockeys as they come into the system. They're only 16. As Jeff was saying, these are young kids. What we're doing now is that we're encouraging them to speak. We're encouraging them to chat with one of these psychs. And these aren't men in white coats. These are normal people. They look normal. They're walking through the gyms. At lunchtime, you'll see they're actually on the rowing machines themselves, keeping fit. From these groups, we are typically identifying, and this is almost every cohort, 1 or 2 young people who've never before spoken to a mental wellbeing professional. They've never received any support. They've never opened up, but yet they're carrying pre-existing mental vulnerabilities, probably as a result of trauma in their young lives. This doesn't stop them from gaining a license, and that's really important to them and to us. But what it gives them a safe space to reach out for support. It gives us an early indication that they will need that extra support. And if needs be, we go back to that safe response chart that I showed earlier. Raising awareness and reducing the stigma. It goes without saying almost, but it is so important. The word of mouth is by far and away the most effective way of initiating that first entry into receiving mental wellbeing support. We work really hard to challenge stigmatising language. We've really benefited from the British Horse Racing Authority's Code of Conduct, which came out quite recently. That's given us a benchmark from which to go to. And unacceptable language, unacceptable behaviour, we can use that now to our benefit. Going back to this document, and again, you'll see the purple are the areas of work that we're starting. This is a long haul. This is not a quick win. We're not working to any Olympics, but we are working to increase the well-being of all of our jockeys. And in the red there, the annual MOT is something that we're really keen to introduce. We can't mandate it because, as I said, we're not the governing authority. But what we're doing, almost as a friend of the jockey, is inviting them into our centres on an annual basis to come in, to see the dietitian, to see the changing mind psychologist, to have a look at their DEXA. If we're worried about their bone health, we can put them through the DEXA scan. We can look at their skin fold tests to see where their weight might be, where we think it could get to. We're on their side, and we're hoping to do that each year. At the same time, we'll look at their protection. So we'll look at their body protectors, we'll look at their crash helmets. It's a fantastic way of touching base with them, slowing them down for a day, and just making sure that where they are, getting a little bit of data, so we've got a benchmark. When they do get injured, we know where we can bring them back to. The last two bits there in the blue I'll come on to in my next slide, which is actually getting the jockey is actually really difficult. Got former jockeys sitting in front of me, but they'll appreciate the 365-year nature of the sport. So what we do is we work hard to support the family, whether that's the obvious family and friends, whether it's the yard staff, the coaches, other jockeys and their agents. Again, training them not to be psychologists, but training them to listen, to be aware of the danger signs so that they know where to go, where they need to come to for help. Beyond that inner ring, there's a second ring. That's more of the racing world, as we call it. So that's the valets, seeing the jockeys every day. They know the mood so well. It's the racing schools where they've come through. It's their own professional jockeys association. Then, of course, it's the trainers and the clerk, who, of course, also need help themselves. So we try to bring them into the fold for two reasons on that. All of this is so important that we don't work in silos. So it's a collaborative initiative, working with the authorities, working with Professional Jockeys Association. And what we found particularly helpful is that we bring all of these individuals together on a monthly basis in a forum. So this is something that other sports are doing and have done, I think, and I believe, very effectively for the last few years, so that we're opening it up. It's not a cloak and dagger. It's not behind the scenes. We're opening up this issue. We're chatting about mental well-being, and we're there to offer help without being judgmental in any way. We do think there is reason for optimism, despite the underlying trends both in sporting and in the wider world. What we're seeing is this new young cohort, this Generation Z, as we're calling them, they are more open about discussing mental well-being. They're more open to seeking help, and we're, of course, providing them with better help from an earlier position. So we can feel really optimistic about this. The whole industry is moving forward, and we do believe that just very slowly, the stigma of poor mental well-being just might be reducing. Thank you.